Big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. We see a ton of talk in the fandom about the boyfriends on Gilmore Girls, but one thing we don't hear talked about a lot in specific terms is the unrequited love interests on the show, except when it pertains to Marty because he's the most obvious one. But it's not just about crushes that aren't returned. When you look at the definitions of unrequited love, a few other patterns emerge, and it's fertile ground for analysis of the relationships on the show. So this week, we're going to talk about some of those relationships from a few other angles.
But before we do that, this is your weekly reminder that this is a spoilers all podcast, and that we would be eternally grateful if you would hit the like and subscribe buttons and share this video with your friends. And now for the synopses.
Season 2, Episode 21, Lorelei's Graduation Day. As Lorelei's graduation day approaches, she's hesitant to invite her parents because she believes they won't be interested in going after she didn't finish high school and didn't go to the type of school they wanted her to go to. Rory invites them on her behalf, and Lorelei has no idea they're coming until she finds Emily in the ceremony space with her videographer. Despite her trepidation about it, Emily and Richard are clearly very proud of what Lorelei has accomplished at business school. Rory is upset that Jess left without saying goodbye, so she skips school to take a bus to New York to see him, but an accident on the interstate prevents her from making it back to Hartford in time for the ceremony. Lorelei is upset, but forgives Rory when she sees how remorseful she is for screwing up so badly.
This is followed by I Can't Get Started. And in the season finale, Suki's wedding day has arrived, and Lorelei is busy preparing the inn. Christopher is in the neighborhood to see Rory have her cast removed, and Lorelei invites him to stick around for Suki's rehearsal dinner, at which he tells her that he and Sherry are going through a rough patch, and he's thinking about finding a new place. Lorelei also invites him to the wedding, and the night before, while putting finishing touches on the decorations, things get carnal between them. Rory has been roped into being Paris's running mate for school council elections, and when they win, she finds out she has to go to Washington for 6 weeks over the summer. At the wedding, Jess shows up and says he's moving back to Stars Hollow, and Rory kisses him. Just before the ceremony begins, Christopher receives a phone call from Sherry, letting him know that she's pregnant, and Chris tells Lorelei he's going back to her.
Oof, the juice.
It's quite the season finale.
And I love it. It's great. We will talk more about it in next week's episode. We'll get to that later. But for now, speaking of unrequited love, shout out to my boyfriend, who was the one who came up with the idea for this episode. You probably thought I was going a different direction with that, but no. Yeah, so a while back when Dan and I were watching the show, he was like, you should do an episode on this. And I was like, my God, you're right. So here we are talking about all those moments on the show where relationships just couldn't quite get off the ground. And there's a lot more to this than I originally thought. I was like, well, there's a couple like obvious ones. But when you look at a definition of what unrequited love is and how many kind of like different variations there might be, I was like, I'm seeing a lot more of this than I thought in the show. And I think it's part of, just the general nature of television and serialized storytelling like this, where there has to be tension and there has to be unevenness of feelings and there has to be long drawn out friends to lovers tropes and all of that good stuff to keep people interested in a TV show. So you see a little bit more of it in television, and that sort of over dramatization of it imprints on our psyches a little bit too much, maybe, and we start to dramatize those things in our own lives. And when things are sort of normal and balanced and reciprocal, we're like, is this a relationship? So the characters in the show fall into that trap, and we're here to talk about it. So first off, I'm going to just lay a little bit of foundation and give a very, very basic definition of unrequited love. And I think a good place to start is just to say that it's basically any love that isn't returned to the same degree with which it is given. It's wanting someone you can't have for a number of reasons. But using that as a jumping off point, which one of our characters do you think is most on the receiving end of unrequited love? Like, who kind of gets that the most?
I'm going to say Luke. Because I feel like it took so long for him and Lorelei to get to the point that they were at. And Lorelei had to go through several other relationships too before she and Luke ended up together. But I feel like hers were a bit more successful in that regard, in terms of there potentially being even the whispers of love and attraction and chemistry. And I feel like Luke was just pretty much almost always striking out with the women that he attempted to date and then marry on a cruise ship and get divorced to. And I would go with Luke, because I feel like, again, pun intended, that man was just striking out at the plate every single inning until Lorelei came up to bat.
Yeah, the baseball puns are going to run strong from here to October, so get ready for that.
Yeah.
You know, obviously the Scott Patterson connection is there, but it's also just straight up baseball season. And there's a lot of good, like, relationship baseball euphemisms.
Mm-hmm. We won't go there.
Yeah, they're just right in our vernacular.
That's the weeds.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on how you approach this or interpret this question. Because, like, who's on the receiving end of it the most? Like, who feels unrequited love the most, or who is constantly, like, dealing with other people's unrequited crushes on them? Like,
that's fair.
Yeah, so, like, I would say Rory probably gets the most interest that she doesn't reciprocate. So I guess it depends which angle you're approaching that from. But, you know, obviously there's Tristan and there's Marty and there's all the guys at the male Yale party. And, you know, probably other dudes that we don't even know about that the show didn't focus on. But she just kind of always has someone nipping at her heels. She's put on a pedestal a lot and just always has a guy after her. And we'll get to her and Marty a little bit in more detail. But yeah, Luke is also a good one.
I will
he probably is the longest running, like, most like the most emphasis, I think, is put on his sort of will they won't they crush with Lorelei.
Honorable mention, which I just want to briefly say now, and I didn't even think of it before this moment, but Emily. Not number one, but she does have men that show her interest before and after Richard's passing, and she shuts it down and doesn't really let anything come to fruition. But it's there for her, and so kudos, Emily.
Yeah, again, you just sort of assume she's with Richard forever, but then you remember in the revival, Jack Smith was a thing. So, yeah. Yeah, so I think there are a number of different kinds of unrequited love that we see. So an interesting one could be like a crush on someone nearby without trying to initiate a romantic relationship. And I think that's where Luke falls in. But also someone I want to pay just some quick lip service to before we get, like, too in the weeds on Luke and Lorelei is Kirk. Remember in Haunted Lake when Kirk asks out Lorelei and says that she's the prettiest woman he's ever seen outside of a filthy magazine? It's such a sweet moment, and she ultimately turns him down. But what did you think of that one? Like, how did that play for you?
I mean, I think Lorelei, like, look, you got to shoot your shot sometimes. Kirk did that. Lorelei wasn't untruthful when she said that, like, I'm fresh off the heels of just another relationship ending poorly for me. I'm not in the right frame of mind to be considering other men yet or getting back into the dating pool in any regard. And I know that can be, like, both ways with men and women aligned sometimes, where it's like, oh, it's not, like, you know, the whole, it's not you, it's me. I just came off a bad relationship. I'm not ready for this. But it wasn't a line for her. She was giving Kirk the honest truth that she just wasn't in that framework and that mindset for it yet. And I applaud Kirk for his courage and just, again, taking a chance. I mean, you don't know unless you try. And they were obviously, I don't think they were ever going to be the right people for one another, even if Lorelei was emotionally available at that point. But it was just a sweet moment because Kirk's a sweetheart. Like he doesn't know any better sometimes, but like he has, I think, the purest of intentions with what he does. And I think Lorelei, as graciously as she could, just said, it's just not the right time because it's honestly just not the right time. And she left it at that without unnecessarily hurting his feelings.
I agree. I think it was one of the best rejections we see on the show because it's honest, but it's not unkind. And she does a really good job of being like, look, I know that this sounds like a line because people use this as a line, but I really did just come out of a really complicated relationship because obviously we saw as an audience that she just came from dinner where Chris showed up and there was a big screaming match and she was not emotionally in a place to jump into anything else just yet. And the other side of that equation is that they are friends and she doesn't want to complicate that. And she knows that they're maybe not well suited for each other. And, she doesn't have to entertain every crush of every townie ever. So, because, she probably gets a lot of attention and interest from guys because she's beautiful and funny and vivacious. So I could see a lot of that happening. And so maybe she's just gotten good at it over the years, but at least she was thoughtful of Kirk's feelings in that moment. Whereas like when she initially told Rory about it, Rory was not very nice and neither was Luke. They were just joking at Kirk's expense and it wasn't very nice. But Lorelei was very tactful in her rejection. And I like that about her.
Yeah, tact is not always her strongest suit, but she did it well there, so I've got to commend her for it. I agree.
It's true. Is there any other one or any other character that stands out to you as like a good rejection when something like this happens on the show?
Good rejection. I mean, I feel like the man just kind of went away on his own, but Alex?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was such a weird one. Again, the meta reason is obviously that Billy Burke, I think, was unavailable.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't bring him back, so he just faded into oblivion.
I mean, you have the whole fishing expedition and, him realizing quickly, like, when he says to Rory, like, oh, your mother's never been fishing before, has she? And she's like, no, she's a fish killer. She's a pro. And so they have a couple dates. I loved their little coffee tasting date that they had. It was obviously an encounter that would be right up Lorelei's alley. And I feel like it was a cute moment for them. They're two just people that I feel like would be good as friends for coffee dates and movie dates or whatever. I didn't see any compatibility that necessarily led me to think that they would move beyond that or that they should. But again, it was just, he was only there for 3 episodes and then he kind of just faded into oblivion. And I mean, I'm okay with it because I feel like he was also written in as a way to like get Lorelei to maybe question some of her feelings and her views on men. So I'm glad for what we got from him for the work that it allowed Lorelei to do in terms of just internal thought and some self-reflection. But that, like, I just think like the way he went away was just, oh, okay, bye, nice knowing you. But it wasn't, again, breakups and anything like that can be really brutal and just end badly sometimes. And so I love the instances on this show where even if a man isn't right for any one of our Gilmore women or any one of the women that we're going to talk about or vice versa, I love when it can just healthily end in a way that's not severely detrimental to any one person. And this did that too.
Yeah. At least we assume it happened like that because we weren't shown it, obviously. Yeah. We sort of have to fill it in as a headcanon because we never got an actual answer. But obviously the other thing that was going on at that time was Max's return, and Lorelei kind of, some resurging feelings from a past relationship. We'll get to more of that later as well. But just, I think that tipped the scales. It unbalanced the interest in the equation. And so Lorelei probably did have to go to Alex after that and be like, you're great, but I think maybe seeing Max again made her realize what that passion and that tension is like, and it made her want more of that, and she wasn't feeling it with Alex, and so she probably let him off the hook. But we'll never know. So I hope she did it the nice way. But something you said also made me think about another thing that's kind of common in unrequited dynamics, which is where one person will sort of mold themselves a little bit or try to make themselves more attractive to the object of their desire. So Lorelei going fishing being the example that you brought up, when it's just completely out of her wheelhouse. She is not an outdoorsy gal. Can you think of any other good examples from the show where like someone just really tried too hard to pick up a hobby or a change in order to impress someone?
Dean.
Good one.
I think he was coming at it from a kind of nice and right, angle or whatever. He reads and takes an interest in the books that Rory is recommending. He watches the shows that she wants him to watch. In return, she has to watch like BattleBots. I think they were both guilty of it sometimes, in terms of like, I'll do what you want to, even though this doesn't interest me, because I'm just trying to make myself appealing to you, and even perhaps like make you want to spend time with me. And that's where I think that's the crux, and that's where it can get like into some really, just thin ice, where it's like your partner should want to spend time with you because they want to spend time with you, not because you're promising them BattleBots or a show that like, oh, I get to like just, watch a show that I want to watch, and you're going to be there. So like, okay, cool. It should be first and foremost about wanting to spend time with a person, and not necessarily what the activity is. And if you can find common ground in terms of like, yes, we both like this show or this movie, or we like, this particular hobby or this particular outing or doing this specific thing in our spare time together, that's fine. But there should be that commonality that just lends itself to, we both like this even without the other person being there. And I'm not doing this because I just want to appeal to this person or come across as more attractive to them or try and gain brownie points. And I think if you're doing it solely for that reason, which I feel like Dean was guilty of a lot of the time, where he's like, maybe in his mind, like, I just want Rory to like me, and I want this girl to like me, and I want this to continue to go well. So I'll do the things that she wants me to do, even though I have zero desire to actually partake in any of these things. And that's where it gets dicey. So I would call out Dean for that.
I would tend to agree with that. I have brought up this in the past where their relationship often felt very transactional. And it is good to take an interest in your partner's interests. But I think there's a difference between the quid pro bro of I'll do this if you do that, and an actual genuine desire to engage with something that they love in a way that like isn't pushing you so far beyond your boundaries all the time that like you have to negotiate for it. Like, for example, when Dan and I first started seeing each other, he started watching Gilmore Girls without me having to ask him. He just started doing it. And I'm like, that's great. And so now we can talk about that. And as like a somewhat reciprocal type thing, I started watching Star Trek with him. But it's not like I will watch one episode of Star Trek for every episode of Gilmore Girls you watch. It's because he loves it so much and I want to understand it. And in exploring it, I'm starting to have fun. It's something we can now do together, but it's different than what they were doing. We're trying to like just like partake of each other's loves, not get what we want out of the relationship. So it's not unbalanced, which is the territory they were treading into. But another thing that sort of, Dean got the wheels turning on for me is the tendency for people who have a crush on someone to go out of their way to put themselves in the other person's path and to just always kind of do things to hang out with the other person, or I don't even know how to explain this fully, but so Dean did a little bit of that where, he followed her onto the bus trying to get her attention, but it made me think of a Tisket a Tasket where now we have Jess in the mix. And for a long time, Jess liked Rory, but Rory was unavailable because she was dating Dean. And so we had him bidding $90 for some terrible food just for the opportunity to have lunch with Rory. And he has that line where he said, outbidding Dean was, the way to get you here. It's like, I have to be, or screwing with Dean was just to get me here to be nice to you. Because she was calling him out on, like, why are you only nice to me? And so I think that's another interesting side to Unrequited Love. So, like, do you have any thoughts on Jess and the sort of back and forth nature and the unavailability of one or both of those people at any given time? Because there's a lot there, I think.
God, like, you're asking me to, like, crap on Jess, which
yes, I am.
I'm gonna get you back for this.
It's only fair.
Just wait.
Reciprocity, huh?
Yeah. Yes, there will be. Fine. It was a. God, you're killing me. It's like I'm like an ant under like the spotlight, and you're just watching me squirm right now. It was a bit passive aggressive. It was juvenile. He did not respect that Rory was still taken at that point. When he was making some just misplaced advances and trying to get this whatever to happen at this point, whatever he might have been hoping for. I can understand Dean's response to it and him just being like, what the heck is this guy doing? Like, he's undermining our relationship. He's trying to come between it. He's not being respectful of what you and I have. And that's not cool. Like, it doesn't matter who's doing it. So it's not like Jess went into the bit of basket like some of Lorelei's men that Miss Patty had brought in, just being like, oh, I'm just trying to like get set up, or like, here's a girl that I think is pretty, but I don't know that she's taken, so I'm just doing this without any ulterior motives. Like, Jess went into the bit of basket with very clear-cut intentions, knowing what he was doing. It was not above board. I don't love it, and I understand Dean just being like, I don't want you to go to lunch to him. I'm uncomfortable with this. And it put Rory in a really awkward position too, because then she's like, well, these are just the rules of the bit of basket thing. Like, he won, I have to do this. I think Dean maybe needed to trust Rory a little bit more in that moment, just to like say like, this is just going to be a one and done, and I trust that nothing's going to happen because I trust my girlfriend. But I can understand the uncomfortability because Jess was being pretty arrogant.
Yeah. And even Lorelei gave him that same piece of advice of like, you love Rory, and part of love is trust, which is exactly right. But that being said, yeah, it kind of worked. Jess's ploy to hang out with her and weasel his way in kind of worked, because they ended up having a good time, and she went home, and instead of like spending the rest of the day with Dean, she had spent it out book shopping and eating pizza with Jess. And then, she had to put Dean off and repairing the fight from earlier until like the end of the night. And she would surreptitiously call Jess instead of Dean at other points in time. And it's like, oh, it's working, but that doesn't make it okay. And then obviously there's the rub where once again, Rory sets a boundary with Dean and expresses her wants and needs, and they're ignored. And then Jess once again finds an excuse to hang out with Rory by bringing her food and saying it was from Luke when it was not. So he tried that several times to kind of put himself in her path in order to build a relationship with her. So it wasn't the greatest start that they had. So I don't love it. And the other thing for me about Jess is this dynamic continued because over the summer, Rory was still sort of like, I don't know which direction to go. And then she comes back and sees him with Shane. And then the jealousy really kicked in because she thought she could just take her sweet time and like decide which guy she wanted to be with, as if she was solely in control of all of this. And then she was like, not very nice to Shane. She was kind of a jerk. And so eventually the relationship is requited. But I think, I can't remember exactly when this quote comes. I want to say it's in One's Got Class and the Other One Dies. When Luke is confronting Jess about Shane, I think that's when Lorelei finds her in the closet. Like she gets in there on her own. And Luke's kind of like, you should respect her more and whatnot. And he's like, I don't even like her all that much. And he's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, the girls I like don't give a damn about me. And so obviously he's probably faced some rejection in the past where, there's been girls he likes that he thinks are out of his league or they think he's out of their leagues. And I think maybe Rory in a way is someone he can put on a pedestal and fantasize about a little bit. And he can fantasize about a relationship with her because she's untouchable. He can't get her. Mm-hmm. And the drama and the tension and the game of it all is sort of thrilling to him because it allows him to stay detached from it. He doesn't have to make himself vulnerable or really like put himself out there because she's got a boyfriend. So he can just sort of play this game back and forth and never have to really commit to anything because it's not really real. It's all in his head. Well, it's not all in his head. She does kind of reciprocate his feelings, but doesn't know what to do about it because she's young and inexperienced. And you see a lot of unrequited love in teenagers who are just figuring out how to do all this stuff. But I think it's sort of like some insecurity, both like jealousy and also insecure attachment from bringing with his mom and just like not seeing healthy relationships modeled and just feeling like he doesn't deserve maybe a good relationship or real love because he's never experienced it. And so I think his crush on Rory is a way for him to like get the girl without actually having to do the work of a relationship with the girl. And we see that play out later in season 3, where once they're together, he's just like, whatever, I don't really care. You're mine now. I'm not going to like have to do anything to maintain this relationship because I got you already. And then he just pieces out because things started getting too real. His feelings were too intense and the drama was no longer like hypothetical. It was something that had been brought into the real world and it wasn't as ideal as the psychological fantasy of it all.
Mm-hmm. I agree. He's not the only one who pieced out on Rory, though, when she wasn't ready to commit to things. Just going to say that. But I want to move us along to a different type of unrequited love and maybe get us talking about Lorelei a little more here. Well, Lorelei and Rory. But because I think they both fell into this trap too. but a different type of unrequited love, which is the longing for the love of someone that you've been in a relationship or have loved in the past. I feel like we get it more from Lorelei, especially with Chris, in terms of her constantly going back to him, even when there are multiple times it just doesn't work, and then she keeps going back to him anyway. But Rory also goes back to Dean when she shouldn't. What do you think about, I'll start with Lorelei and Chris, about them constantly coming back to one another? What do you think was going on there? What was the draw of these two people always, every couple of years, coming back to one another, even when it had seemingly never been working out, when they were always getting with other people, when jobs were coming between them, and nothing was ever fleshing out in terms of their relationship? Why, what do you think it was, and why did they keep coming back to each other when it was just unsuccess after unsuccess?
Yet another excellent example. I think part of it is because they were sort of stuck in limbo a little bit. They had such a deep connection that goes so far back into their past, and they share a child. Like, that's a very special bond, to share a child with someone. And they were so young when it happened that she just didn't want to put Christopher in the position of having to give up his future and what he wanted out of life because of a choice that she made. And I mean, in a way, that's fair, but he was willing to get married. And I think it sort of left them in this place where they were like, what if? For a long, long time, because there was so much intensity of emotion when all of this happened. There was a lot of teen hormones raging, and sharing a child and having your parents expect you to get together with the father of your child always sort of stuck with them. And because Lorelei sort of told him, like, no, this isn't happening, I think she always had him in the back of her mind. And she even says it to him kind of at the end of It Should Have Been Lorelei. Like, the prospect of them being together was on hold while he got himself together, or at least that's what she thought. And then she saw him be that guy. She saw it starting in presenting Lorelei Gilmore, and she was very attracted to it immediately. The minute she noticed that he was like driving a Volvo and trying to be responsible, she was like, oh yeah, this is on. And then we find out he's got Sherry. And then we see it again in Take the Deviled Eggs, when she's talking to Sherry about how much he's really stepping up and how he's been so great about all this. And she just sort of has this moment of, like, I wanted him to be that guy for me. Why couldn't he be that guy for me? And part of me is like, because you didn't let him? Like, I always wonder if it was because of their general immaturity, or whether it was because he never really did have it in him. I still, like, the jury is out for me on whether Chris could have stepped up and sort of like been the guy he became with Sherry a lot earlier, and just like actually grown up, instead of being like, I'm going to go to California and do whatever I want. That's neither here nor there for this episode, but it was the way that Lorelei perceived Christopher's maturity level and what his life was like. And she's always considered them very linked in her mind. And she clearly always had that in the back of her head when she was in other relationships, and it was bad for those other relationships. We see her call him from her bachelorette party. So, and we see their saga. We only see a part of it because we know they have a relationship before the show starts, obviously. But we see them go from, like, he wants to be there, but he's not quite ready, so she pushes him away. And then we see he actually does have it together a little more than maybe she was giving him credit for. And he's finally moved on. He's like, screw this. Like, I'm going to be with someone who actually wants to be with me and, like, actually sees my worth and my value beyond just this. And then we see the whole Sherry thing, her getting pregnant, her leaving Gigi, Lorelei stepping in to help Christopher, and then ultimately their marriage and their divorce. And it was almost like it had to happen for them to finally let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm going to pose you a follow-up question. First off, I agree with everything that you just said. I couldn't have said it better myself. But my follow-up question is that, do you think there was any one instance when Lorelei went back to Christopher, not because she was attracted to like the Volvo or him getting his life together, or because like you're the father of my child, so we're always going to have that bond? Do you ever think it was just stemming from Lorelei being lonely and just wanting an option?
oh boy. Potentially, and I can't get started because by that point she had been broken up with Max for quite some time, and she'd really only been on that one date, I think, with Paul, and the rest of the season was pretty dry for her. And she saw him with Sherry, and she quite enjoyed that side of him, to see him sort of grown up and in a responsible relationship. So I think that there was that. And then, not quite your question, but a sort of related phenomenon happens in partings, and she breaks up with Luke and immediately runs to him because she needs comfort. So it's not so much loneliness as like, I can't be alone right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other instances you can think of?
Not stemming from loneliness necessarily. I mean, maybe stemming from just, it's blunt, but maybe just wanting to get some sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and season 1 in the balcony, and just, revisiting old stomping grounds in that regard. Sometimes like, yeah, like it's not necessarily loneliness. Sometimes like, you just have a need that needs to be fulfilled. And maybe for Lorelei, like she had a couple moments with Chris where it's like, well, why not? Because we've already known each other in this way anyway. So, it is what it is.
Yeah. It was easy for them to slip back into the pattern of like, there's a lot of chemistry here. But another one.
Go on.
I think we were both going to move us on to the same thing.
Probably.
We're going to switch to Rory and her
Mhm.
16-year-old love interest. Obviously, with Dean, there's some slippage there, right? You can tell that, like, she wanted to have a different kind of relationship experience, and she moved on from the nice guy to the bad boy. And it seems by season 4, both of them sort of regret the breakup of that relationship on a number of levels. And you still have my red flag. Bring that back to me next time we see each other.
Soon.
But huge red flag for Dean and the eve of his wedding. Just fawning over Rory while super drunk. So that was a bad sign. And then obviously we have the affair. So any thoughts on the sort of like unrequited love side of season 4 and how they sort of ended up back together?
I mean, it was, you bring up Dean, but that was definitely mutual longing. Dean had, a girlfriend back in Chicago before he moved to Stars Hollow. We don't know extensively what that was like, but I'm just going to say that based off of what we did see, Rory and Dean were each other's first just semi-real, if not real, loves. And so that's always going to have a place in someone's heart and in someone's lives, and it did for them too. And as they got older, and especially Rory started exploring, different types of guys that she could be interested in and what they were going to bring to the table for her, gauging the compatibility that she needed in a partner. Dean probably should have done the same, but maybe didn't as extensively, and just settled for, that's so wrong to say, because like I'm sure Lindsay, like she had her good qualities too.
Yeah.
But settled for like, just anyone who was going to fit into his life in an easy enough way where, like, if we can just get along and, like, you know, have meals together and talk and not bite each other's heads off, like, I guess this is gonna work. Like, we're good here, you know? And it's like, your relationship needs so much more than that, dude. But, like, again,
Children.
just way, yeah, I was about to say, like, way too young, way too naive, didn't know any better. But we see in season 4, and especially on the eve of the wedding, and then the day of the wedding, like, it was a very mutual sort of regret that they had, that their relationship never worked out. It wasn't just Dean longing for what was and what could have been. It was Rory longing for the same. Dean expresses that very bluntly to Luke, you know, when he's had, I guess I had one or two too many beers, and Luke's just like, yeah, a little bit.
No duh.
But, you know, it's just interesting that that regret is coming to the forefront on the eve of his wedding to another woman. And I think he even recognized it the following morning. If he didn't remember exactly what he said, but he knew that he had voiced something. You could tell, like, when he was talking with Luke, that he had voiced some things about Rory that he potentially remembered and that he was uncomfortable about. So, you know, just the moments where he's like, yep, so I should probably go put on my tux and big day getting married. And Luke's just like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, I think even Dean knew that he had stepped into something the night before that he probably regrets voicing to Luke. And now he's having to reckon with hours before he's marrying another woman. But I think it's also equally telling when Rory doesn't go to the wedding upon Luke's instruction, which I think was the right call. Good advice, Luke. But we just see her standing in the square and watching Lindsay and Dean come out of the church, and that girl is in so much pain in that moment. You can just see it written all over her face that she's grieving and that she's hurting because she's watching a man that she previously loved and that I think she still does fully, like, maybe not fully, but actively love in some regard, marrying another woman. And you just, again, it's written all over her face, the regret and the pain and the remorse that she's feeling of, that could have been me, maybe it should have been me, I don't know. But she was just so hurt in that moment, and you wouldn't be feeling that way if you still didn't actively have love and respect and passion for that person.
Yeah. And then they act on it too. Like, by the end of the season, the tensions have like strengthened and gone from just regrets to phone calls while drunk and comforting each other in moments of crisis and nearly kissing in the inn to full-blown cheating with a married man.
Glad you called it that.
Well, that one absolutely is cheating because he was still married and Lindsay was none the wiser about the end of their relationship. Whether they're legally divorced or just separated doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But clearly when he returned home, she thought their relationship was fine. So yeah. So that's the breaking of a marriage vow of fidelity. So that one definitely bad. But it also brings me to another one, which, again, I don't love that they're doing this. But this brings me to Logan in the revival because, you know, just that longing for the past, for like a time when things were easier, and those residual feelings that you sometimes have when a relationship ends and you're not ready for it to end. You can see the pain on Rory's face after turning Logan down at the very end of Onto the Breach. You can tell that, like, it's eating her up, but she thinks that going it alone is the best thing for her at that time in her life. And I can't blame either of them in the situation. She was again, I think she was naive and she thought that like marriage was the end of it for her for some reason. I don't know why. As if you can never move back to the East Coast from California. It's like, nope, it's a black hole. Once you move to San Francisco, it's game over for you. You can never go anywhere or change jobs. But, and I can't blame him for being hurt that she doesn't want to move forward with him and him not wanting to backtrack after putting his entire heart on the line for her in front of everyone. That was a big move. It backfired. It was very uncomfortable for everyone. And you can tell that it hurt them. But now here we are 9 years later, and we can see that they're both unavailable because they're with other people, but are still like there's still something there. So I guess it's not even really unrequited at that point, except for the fact that there are other people in their lives, and it makes it impossible at this point for them to be together until they're willing to break off those other relationships. And Paul steps in and does it for Rory, but we still have Odette in the picture by the end of the revival. And so it's, mutual attraction between people and other relationships is still kind of under the umbrella of unrequited love. And I think there's another type too, where it's like unequal love in a relationship between people who are still together, but like they love to different degrees. Like one person is way more invested than the other person. And we don't meet Odette, so we don't actually know how invested in that relationship she is and how, like, whether or not she's even like emotionally in it with him. So it's hard to actually say, but they love each other for the, presumably, given that Logan calls it can't talk anymore. Logan calls it the dynastic plan. And so there's an outcome there for them that is not related to love. It's a social expectation. It's a familial expectation. And so the feelings might be that like both of them are not that into it, or it could be that like she's really into it and he's not really into it. And so he's getting what he needs from Rory. And what you said during Battle of the Boyfriends was right. Like they really should have had those conversations with their other partners, but this is television. And sometimes we just have to like not punch our televisions and just remember that this is done for the drama. But, it bears discussion, obviously, how that plays into it as well. Like neither of them can really fully act on their feelings. And you can see in the revival that there's still so much care and intimacy and love and regret in both of their eyes. And so that's part of the reason I want to see them get back together in Revival Part 2. So it's there, and it's BS, frankly. Like they're just being jerks to everyone and not owning up to their feelings. And then the other unrequited love bit in the revival brings me back to Jess, where that look through the window, there might be some feelings there too, or some regret or just some nostalgia even. It might not even be like, I want to pursue this, but just so much of like I wonder what would have happened if.
Yeah. I'm gonna maybe, like, this is kind of out of left field. Get ready for it. Do you think that there was I think now, like, that you said it, unrequited love, where one person, one partner is expecting different things from the relationship than what the other person is expecting. One person gives more than what they get. And there are just different expectations or different even levels of love or admiration or some like displays of affection that can be given. Do you think that there was any of that and any requited love within Richard and Emily's marriage?
Ooh. I think for the most part, Richard and Emily were completely requited. They, especially given that Richard was with Pennell a lot and his mom, especially, I don't know about his dad. Actually, his dad probably was passed on by this time, given that Richard said he was quite young when that happened. So it was probably just Trix's influence, but he was with Penelon Lott. But when Emily came onto the scene, it was just like, bam, fireworks. And so he ditched Penelon and proposed to Emily, and they got married shortly after that and stayed together for a really long time until they hit a rough patch, but eventually they worked through that too. And so I think that shows a certain level of commitment to each other and to their social roles. And well, they were separated. They may have divorced eventually. We don't know. The fact that he only moved into the pool house and they didn't actually just like go through a divorce immediately was like, is this for like social reasons, or what's up with this? Do you know you're going to get back together? Because you can't keep apart. But I think for the most part, that was an even playing field when it came to the level of emotion and investment and commitment to the relationship. But on a more general level, the first part of the question, the one that's coming to mind, and it may or may not fall into this camp, I'm not sure, is Lorelei and Max. Because I think Max was more into it than Lorelei was. I think she sort of, like, there was a lot of maybe chemistry and passion on her part, but obviously a relationship is a lot more than that. And Max just seemed a lot more committed to the idea of a partnership and a marriage than she did. Is there anybody else that you think hits that I'm not thinking of right now?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, I think of like Lean and her interest in guys, but that wasn't necessarily on the level that Lorelei and Max were, because especially for a lot of Lane's early crushes, it's such a situation where like the guy didn't even know that like Lane was interested in. So there's nothing to reciprocate because he's completely unaware, because this is just so one-sided. At least in Lorelei and Max's situation, they were actively dating. They were in a solidified relationship with one another, even though I agree that Max had much more of an interest in Lorelei than she ever had in him, and it was very unbalanced in that regard. I think that's the most prominent example, to answer your question. But I do want to start talking about some of Lane's crushes and the men in her life too. Because as I just said, a lot of those crushes were just completely unrequited, in the sense of like, the boy doesn't even know that you exist. Like, he has no clue of your interest because you're just randomly running your hand through his hair unconsensually, for starters. But what do you think about Lane's interest in Rich, and then in Dave, in Young Chu's interest in her? Do you think Lane, do you think Lane ever was going to find an adequate partner in any one of those earlier guys if given the opportunity? Because we see her end up getting like saddled with Zach, which I know we both have thoughts on too. But do you think any one of those earlier partners could have worked out for her, or was it just, nope, that was always going to be completely unrequited and unbalanced from one end of the spectrum or the other?
Yeah, those were bad. All of them. Well, not so much Dave. Dave was actually pretty solid, and I think he was meant to be endgame, but obviously Adam Brody is
Adam Brody.
His Adam Brody. Rich was just hopelessly out of left field. Sure, he was cute and he did have great hair, but like, there was nothing to that relationship. That was just like a crush where she's like, this guy is really cute and I want to get with him, but I don't know how, because I am socially inept when it comes to dating because of my religious upbringing. And then that brings us to Todd, the double date from Heck. Mm-hmm. Lorelei's was the double date from hell, hers was the double date from Heck.
I like that.
It wasn't as bad. But obviously she's like, oh, I'm so into him. We're talking soulmates. She has no idea what that word means. Go look that up. Just, oh, honey, sweetie, baby, no. That was so bad. It, again, shows some of her ineptitude at determining what's just sort of like her projections of fantasy and what's existing in reality. You know who I loved? Henry Cho. He was the
Yes.
perfect guy for her. He was like that balance of someone that like would actually integrate well into her family and would be accepted, but is also like into the same things as she is, and he's cute and she likes him. So
Yeah,
that one I could have seen.
I feel so bad for Lane in that regard because I don't fault Henry for making the decisions that he did at the end of the day to like have to call off what could have been between them, because he tried so hard to make it work with Lane, doing roundabout things like calling payphones and then just calling, your house and pretending that you're trying to sell like a subscription to something.
The New York Times.
Yeah. And Lane having to like make him jump through all of these loopholes. It's not Lane's fault because, like, again, she was raised with a mother who she thought is never going to approve necessarily of anybody because she just hasn't ever. So, like, even though Henry might have been perfect for her and Mrs. Kim would have approved, like, she didn't know that. She was just so afraid of her mother's reaction and the disapproval that she was just wanting to try and get to know these guys better and get to know Henry better, but without her mother's interference. So I can understand that. But I can also understand Henry just being like, I like you, Lane, but I want to be able to come to your house and pick you up and take you out on a date and not have to like call and do all of these roundabout things just to try and be with you and even see you. I don't fault him for that at all. And it devastated and it crushed Lane in the moment. And my heart goes out to her for that, because it really, like, she didn't really do anything wrong either. She was just contending with an upbringing and a situation that she just didn't know how to broach in any sort of different way. But I feel for her when, she says, like, then, has that reckoning. I'm just like, I really liked this guy, and goes to her mom and is just like, well, maybe you would have liked him too. Just that whole situation was bad. But I do agree with your original statement that, like, yeah, Henry probably could have and would have been a good fit for her had she had the nerve and the daring to go to her mom about it and not do what she did to Henry in terms of, again, the loopholes.
Yeah. And then you mentioned Young too, who is adorable and seems like a sweetheart. But and it's funny because I think that's the only time we have like unrequited love with Lane as the object of the affection, as opposed to Lane's fantasies about something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so funny. And she's like, oh my God, he likes me. That was hilarious and adorable. But, we don't get a ton about Young Chu other than the fact that he has a Japanese girlfriend. And I think that his father builds Adventist hospitals. So,
Mm-hmm.
He's family approved and he's sweet and he likes her. But we don't know that there's anything for them beyond that. And so, by that point, Lane is invested in Dave and is just like way too on the Dave Rogalski train. And like, who can blame her? Holy moly. That relationship leapt off the screen. I loved it. But yeah, poor guy. Like, he was hopelessly outmatched by someone who was way more in Lane's orbit.
Mm-hmm. Mm. What about Paris?
Ooh,
and
Paris.
Herman.
Yes. And so we have some overlap between Paris and Rory when it comes to one of my least favorite characters, Tristan Dugray. Like, Tristan is that annoying kid from the schoolyard who pulls your hair and then your parents are like, oh, he just does it because he likes you.
He likes you.
Yeah. But except it's true, and he's a grown-up douchey version of that little kid. He just has absolutely no idea how to maturely engage with Rory. It's like, if he hadn't been such a jerk, maybe he might have had a chance with her. Because obviously Paris sees something in him that, Paris is, again, a little naive, but she's pretty smart and she's known him for a long time, and she says nice things about him, which is surprising. But yeah, his crush on Rory just was bad. Like, he was so not cool to her. He tried to instigate the fight with Dean, which was just crazy uncomfortable to watch. And then we have the PJ Harvey ticket situation, which sent Paris into a months-long meltdown, basically, and made her hold that grudge against Rory that just would not end, despite the fact that Rory was insistent upon the fact that she doesn't like Tristan and she's not going out with him and she's not going to the concert. But it still wasn't enough that Rory tried to help Paris and Tristan get kickstarted, unfortunately. So any thoughts on third Lorelei, where Paris and Tristan actually go on a date?
I thought it was sweet. Like, I think that Tristan was still maybe likely approaching it from just a sort of, well, I've got nothing better to do with my time sort of mantra. And that obviously is going to sit wrong with me because it doesn't do it's a total discredit and a disservice to Paris. So if that was the mindset that he was going into with it, that's not great at all. But he gave her a chance for a reason. I would like to think that maybe there was some semblance of that thought process and that decision making from him, that it's just like, well, maybe I should actually give her a chance, because who knows, maybe Paris could actually be someone who I can get along with and would enjoy spending time with. And I don't want to think like so 100% across the board negatively of Tristan, where he was just approaching it from like a boredom or a lack of options. I just want to, like, in my mind, give him that 1% benefit of the doubt, but then it doesn't work out. And he just chooses like, no, I don't ever want to go on another date with you ever again, which is his prerogative. But the way that he breaks that to Paris and, just says like, no, Paris is left understandably upset too, and now has to contend with just this very apparent rejection in her face of someone that she has had such a long held interest in, and she doesn't handle it well. But can we expect her to? I don't think so necessarily, because she had waited so long for that opportunity, and Tristan just turns around and just essentially stomps on her heart almost immediately in the aftermath. So of course she's going to need time to process that and work through it. I love the chance that he gave her, but I don't love how he immediately was so dismissive of her after the fact.
Yeah, and something I hadn't thought of occurred to me as you were talking there when it comes to reasons that Tristan agreed to that date in the first place. And I'm wondering almost if he did it because it was Rory who suggested it.
I can see that.
Yeah. And because he even mentions it to Paris. He's like, when Rory suggested we go out, I'm like, oh, why would you tell her that?
Yes, like, don't say that.
Yeah, no, bad. Yeah, so...
Yeah, because then obviously it's going to come across to Paris just like a pity date. Which maybe it was.
Yeah, it was just bad all around. So I really don't like Tristan. If they were trying to give Rory a legitimate alternative to Dean, or like a Jess character type thing with Tristan, they were missing the mark in the writing of that particular character. And he was just a jerk to Rory and to Paris. Not to mention the whole summer situation where he was like literally just dating her to piss Rory off and to like bide his time until she deigned to notice him. Mm-hmm. So don't like that. Using other people. It's kind of the same with Jess and Shane. They weren't really that into each other. They just liked to make out, and that was not fair to either of those girls. So don't love it. But let's jump ahead a little in time.
Okay.
to, we name dropped him early on, but we haven't really talked much about him. Marty. How do we feel about Marty and like that whole situation?
I love Marty. He just, what a sweetheart of a guy. Like, I never saw anything in him that I would really just adamantly flag him on. He had things in himself that I think he needed to work on, namely setting boundaries with Rory and with his interactions with other people. And I feel like because he didn't have those boundaries, he let Rory sort of maybe tread on him a little bit and feel unnecessary pain that he wouldn't have had to feel if he just had said like no to like a movie night and then going to the Chinese restaurant. But he just always felt to me like a very stand-up guy. Socially awkward perhaps, maybe even trepidatious of women, which I think could stem from just it's scary to put yourself out there no matter who you are, no matter what gender you are. But I feel like for him, what I also saw was maybe just fear of rejection right off the bat and just wanting to avoid that at all costs because rejection can be a very difficult thing for anyone to have to combat, and no one wants to have to encounter it or face it because it is hurtful and it's hard to overcome. So in his mind, maybe, well, if I don't even put myself out there, I don't have to worry about ever being rejected because I'm not even trying in the first place. But then his first encounter with Rory, even though it's a very embarrassing situation with him being naked in the hallway, Rory is gracious and kind to him, and she doesn't mock him in a way that some people might and just say like, haha, naked guy, like, or just make fun or take advantage of the situation. She offers him her robe, just says, go back to your room. And I think he responded to that kindness that was shown and said, well, here's a woman that is kind to me, who just was good to me in that moment. Maybe I would like to get to know her better. And as he starts to do so, he definitely does develop feelings for her and he wants to get to know her better. And then we have that whole scene with him saying, I like you. And she says, oh, well, but I like Logan. And there's that rejection. And it crushes him. And I feel like it just goes back to what I said, where in his mind, I could see him being the kind of person where I would have never had to feel this rejection and face this now and confront it if I had just never let myself feel in the first place. He also, but again, just the not setting boundaries, where he wanted to say no to watching movies with Rory because he knew, I think at that point, he knew that his feelings were unrequited, even if it wasn't love at that point. I think he knew that he felt more for her than she felt for him. So continuing to spend time with her was going to just hurt him because he was going to continue to feel invested. He knew that she wasn't going to reciprocate, and that was just going to crush him, but he said yes anyway. And so that was his own fault. He should have just been adamant in saying no and setting that boundary, but he didn't, and this is where we ended up.
Yeah, Marty's a tricky one because it's sort of that friends to lovers thing. Well, obviously they never got to the lovers part of it, but they started out with sort of a, like you said, an embarrassing interaction that turned into friendship. I just think of that breakfast scene in the next episode after the party, and he's like, I want to introduce you to the breakfast crew, and I was really intimidated to talk to you, but now that you're here in your robe and your bunny slippers, like I can actually talk to you, which kind of a dick move, not gonna lie.
Mm-hmm.
Just get over yourself and talk to her like a normal human being. She's obviously nice enough to treat you with dignity in that moment, so the least you can do is not try to embarrass her in return. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And it takes like a year and a half for him to say anything about his feelings. Like you can see it start to come up, but then anytime he tries to like make that move, he gets unintentionally, indirectly rejected. Like when he's like, Rory, do you have a boyfriend? And she's like, no. He's like, why? And she's like, I don't know. And then she goes and gets with Dean.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. It's clear that like she doesn't share his feelings, unfortunately. And so I'm torn between like he should have just told her sooner, but every time he might have tried, he gets a little bit thwarted. And then the other side is too like clearly they had a nice friendship, and it might have been good for him to actually try to maintain that friendship instead of letting his lopsided feelings get in the way, just processing it, moving on, and letting it be its own thing once it was clear that she wasn't into it. And like he didn't have to completely cut off the friendship. But then by the time we get to season 7, so I know you say like, oh, Marty's so nice, but by the time he gets with Lucy and just keeps hitting on Rory, who is now friends with his girlfriend, like, no, that's not it. It's once again in that unrequited love territory. He's unavailable, she's unavailable, and all these feelings are bubbling to the surface because he never dealt with it. He just tried to ignore it, but he never processed through it and tried to like move to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So it just came out in an ugly way.
Do you think that he could have seemingly done better? Do you think there's him or any of our characters, man, woman, whomever, who could have done better in either being on the receiving end of unrequited love and how they handled that rejection and that lack of reciprocal affection, or even someone who was on the other end of it who just loved and felt that way, but when the love wasn't returned, responded negatively to it as a different sort of rejection? Are there any instances that you can highlight where you would flag a character for it's just like, you're wrong, that was rude, that was disrespectful, and the other person deserved better from you?
Rory in that moment, I think, with Marty, when she's like, I like Logan. That was, again, maybe not the most tactful response she could have given in the moment, because she just sort of jumped to the, I'm not into you, I'm into this other guy who clearly triggers something insecure in you, because like look at the way he responded in Written in the Stars to the Life and Death Brigade. He clearly doesn't like them. They make him feel inadequate, and he's just been sort of humiliated in that moment. And she could have been a lot gentler on him and be like, look, Marty, I really value your friendship, but I don't feel the same way. I'm really sorry. I want to maintain our friendship because it means a lot to me. And I don't want to, jeopardize it by being unfair or unkind to you and leading you on in that way. It's too important to me. And, she could have left Logan out of it. Even if it was true, it wasn't the nicest moment for her. And like I said, he didn't take it very well, in the sense of he just kind of ghosted her after that. And then he moved on with another girl, but he didn't actually move on. He didn't do the work. He just sort of displaced his romantic energies towards someone else, and it backfired.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of anyone else?
We kind of already have talked about it, but I just don't feel like Tristan ever handled anything appropriately. And even when he tries to kiss Rory at the party, while they're sitting at the piano, and she instantly just rejects his advances and is like, well, no, like, what are you doing? First off, you came to this party with somebody else, but also like, that's not what I'm here for. Like, I will say that Rory wasn't coming on to Tristan, but was maybe giving him misleading signs of interest for him to pick up on. So I can see how he's just
mixed signals.
Yeah, mixed signals. Like, so he's confused about like what is actually happening here. Is she interested? Is she not? So that wasn't cool on Rory's part at all. She should have been more transparent and not had that happen. But when she instantly is just like, no, that's not what I'm here for, like, and just sets that boundary of like, no, no kissing, like no touching, like that's absolutely not right now. Um, he just takes that rejection really hard and doesn't respond to it well and just becomes like the douchebag Tristan that we all love to hate. Um, and that stems from so many other things that we've talked about with probably a really just tragic upbringing and being on like never on the receiving end of any love from his family or anybody in that regard, but it doesn't still excuse that behavior and what we got from him too when he was having women and Rory in this case turn him down.
Yeah, he's another great example. But we've been going a little long, so I want to close this conversation out with a little bit more discussion on Luke. Because Luke is sort of the ultimate friends to lovers on this show where, you know, in season 5, when they finally go on their date and get together, Lorelei's like, you've been pining for me. And he's like, I haven't been pining for you. And she's like, I'm your Ava Gardner. Because he's held on to this horoscope for 8 years. And so, like, yeah, that's a little bit pining. And you can see it from the pilot with that look at the end. And there's just all this mutual tension. The look on his face when she doesn't show up to paint the diner with him when Christopher is there. The stuff with Max and, you know, just his reaction to her news of her engagement. Just all of it. And finally it culminates in season 4 when it's funny to me because he has that self-help book that helps him have this realization that she's the one that he wants to be with. And yet there's been all this chemistry all this time and everyone can see it. Even Emily and Richard are like, what are you guys doing? You clearly like each other. And so I'm like, how did it take you this long to actually figure that out? And like, what was the block there? But yeah, any other thoughts on Luke and the sort of the long protracted process to get from the pilot to last week fights, this week tights, and raincoats and recipes?
I mean, they both dated other people and they were both seeing other people. So how is any one of them supposed to respond when Luke sees Lorelei going out with all these other men? And in his mind, like, she's not available right now. She's taken. I need to respect that. It doesn't mean my feelings have changed. It doesn't mean I'm not still pining, because I absolutely am. But I can't come between that right now because she's unavailable. And then Lorelei has to contend with it, not as much, but seeing Luke date Nicole and other women, and just realizing too, and we see her have moments where she's just feeling regret over not telling Luke how she's really felt. And now she has to contend with, oh my gosh, am I going to lose him forever because I wasn't transparent enough? Now he's going to end up with this other woman and I'll never get him back. And there goes my shot. And she's, I mean, especially in the later seasons when they have that really bad breakup and she's crying in bed and Rory comes in to console her and she's just like, this is it. Like, that was my shot. I'm never going to get it back. I've lost him forever. It's hard for both of them to see each other dating other people, knowing, I think, always in the back of their minds that it's like, you're probably it for me. And for whatever reason, it took them so long to figure that out. I mean, that's its own discussion. We'd be here for another million years. But you need to be respectful of when people are in other relationships. And I think for the most part they were, but that's why, like, it took them so many years, because they dated other people and they were seeing other people and they had to do some self-introspection. And Luke had to have his self-help book to realize, like, you know, no, like, now I can see her face. And then Lorelei has her own reckoning over time, like, and her own realization of, like, no, this is it for me. And, you know, let's get married, and, you know, the I am all in thing. And it took them long enough, but I think that's why.
Yeah, sometimes it takes some time to go from a friendship type of intimacy to a romantic kind of intimacy. And both of them were sort of emotionally unavailable for a variety of reasons at various points in their friendship. So it doesn't surprise me necessarily that it took so long for them to get together. And obviously, again, I must point out, we are watching a television show. They thrive on dragging stuff like that out because ratings. So there's always that little element to it. I don't love that necessarily about TV shows all the time because I think it's it causes us to sort of dramatize longing and infatuation, and we think that this is how relationships have to be, and it sort of almost valorizes relationships like this where, you know, there's a long suffering, quiet, nice guy who just can't express his feelings to the plucky protagonist, and it's like, can we just be adults for once in our lives and just have a conversation about how we feel? But no, it's television and we can't do that. And I kind of wish sometimes that we had a little more like realistic romance. And not to say that this kind of thing doesn't happen. There are friendships that go all this time and eventually they get together. So it's not to say that none of this ever happens in real life. But sometimes we have to take a step back and look at these relationships and be like, this is really unhealthy. And this is kind of toxic. And we should probably avoid this in our own lives and just actually learn how to talk to each other because, you know, relationships are difficult and tricky and you don't want to put a ton of emotional investment into someone who's not on the same page as you are. And, you know, I, in my single years, was like, I'm over the point where I'm just like out there dating and trying to figure this out. I know what I want now. And anyone I'm going to be with in the future has to be on the same page as me. And so I'm going to make sure that we're on the same page as soon as possible in the relationship so that neither of us wastes time. Because like I'm in my 30s now and I'm over it. I am over this whole like, will they, won't they, tense BS. And so when I got in my current relationship, I laid everything out on the table and he took it really well. And here we are all these months later. So I think TV has ruined us in that way. And you have to sort of like unpack that a little bit to stop the cycle of sort of having crushes that go nowhere and fantasizing about people that you don't even know or have like a parasocial relationship with. I think a lot of us fall into that trap. Like, you know, for a couple years there, I was really in love with Chris Evans and yet, you know, he had no idea. And so he couldn't even requite my love if he tried because he had no idea, which I guess brings me to like one general question. Do you think that the other person, like when someone has feelings for someone else, do you think that those feelings have to be expressed in order for the love to be unrequited? Like, does there have to be an express rejection of feelings for unrequited love to exist?
No. No, I mean, I would like to think that if someone is feeling those things about another person and they're perceptive enough to gauge how the other person is responding to them and interacting with them and treating them, that they could pick up on the lack of reciprocation without needing an express rejection. And I would hope that for anyone's sake, that they are that perceptive and that they don't have to face that rejection because, again, it's hard and it's demoralizing and it can be really brutal to have to work through. But if you can realize that that person doesn't have the same feelings that you do without them needing to actually say it or communicate it or turn you or shut you down in that way, because you can just gauge it for yourself, you're potentially even sparing yourself a lot of heartbreak and a lot of hurt just by recognizing it yourself to begin with. So I will say no, there doesn't have to be blatant rejection for someone to know that love is unrequited if you can just
Right.
pick up on the signs and perceive it for yourself.
I would tend to agree with all of that. And I would like to add that I think just the existence of the feelings in someone, I hate to say makes it real, because it's not real. The whole idea is that it's all in your head in a lot of ways, because when the feelings aren't returned, it's a one-sided relationship. But the experience to the person who is feeling the feelings, like the lack of expression of the feelings doesn't negate their presence. So I think it is possible to have unrequited love. Again, none of this is love, because love is kind of by its very nature reciprocal and committed and communicated regularly. It's a very different experience. I would say unrequited love is almost more like a crush or longing or infatuation with someone else. Love feels like a misnomer. But I think that like anytime someone has those feelings for someone else, whether the other person knows it or whether they're on the other side of the world or they're a famous movie star who has no idea you even exist, that doesn't mean that you're not feeling those things. That's a very like that's a reaction you're having. That is an emotion that you're experiencing. And so you can acknowledge it to whatever level you want. But the thing about this phenomenon is that like you will have the highs, you will have that sort of like dopamine rush anytime you see a picture or think about it or whatever. And like you can have fun with the fantasy as much as you want, but you have to know that there's not necessarily going to always be the opportunity for bringing that into the real world and for the reciprocation of it, the requiting of it. You have to be okay with the fact that this other person either will never know or will not be on the same page. And so you have to maybe like buffer yourself psychologically a little bit so that you don't fall too far into the fantasy that your real life starts to suffer for it.
I agree. And I think that is the perfect capstone and send off for this particular episode. Yeah. That being said, what's coming up next week that viewers should tune back in for?
Right. Well, if you didn't notice when we read our synopses this week, we've done it. We've made it to the end of season 2. So next week, join us for a breakdown of the season. We're going to talk about what we loved, what we didn't love, some of our favorite quotes, all the good stuff from season 2, which is a great season.
Come back and join us for that. I've done it before. I'm going to continue to do it now as often as I remember as we get closer. FanFest, guys, this fall, Algonquin, Maine. We've already had so many wonderful cast members be announced. We want to see more cast members being announced, but that also just means that we need more GG fans to attend. So if you haven't gotten your tickets, please go get your tickets. We will be there. We would love to meet you and interact with you. And we're just hoping that as many people as possible join us and everyone else in Maine this fall. So FanFest is coming. We'll just be counting that down every single week.
Speaking of Mrs. Kim disapproving, Emily Corona is coming. We're so excited.
Yep, that was just recently announced, and we are thrilled about it. So again, go get your tickets because she is a gem of a person and worth meeting and spending time with. And we just hope to see you there.
Come meet Max Medina, Liz, Mrs. Kim. Wasn't there one more? Who am I forgetting?
Yeah, I'm blanking on this too, and I shouldn't be.
I should know this by heart by now.
I know.
There's one more. There's at least 4 already announced. And they will start releasing more. Yeah. So.
Caesar.
Well, Eris is like always there.
Yeah. True.
He is the OG. He loves the fans. He is the sweetest person. Just, yeah, I can't wait to meet all of these people.
And you can meet him too. Buy a ticket and join us and everyone else in Maine. Get on the hype train. In the meantime, go back and watch some of our old videos. We actually, just a couple weeks back, actually did an interview with Emily Carota, if you want to go back and check that out. And you should, because she is a gem and a wonderful human being, and we love to support her. But in general, just go back and watch some of our old content while you wait for next week's episode. And please always do those YouTube things for us. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, check us out on social media. We appreciate all of that support, and it really helps us out. That being said, have a great weekend, and we will see you next Friday night for dinner.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.